Eddie Levert, the mighty heartbeat of the OJs, the voice that carried Love Train, Backstabbers, and For the Love of Money into eternity. For more than 6 decades, his voice wasn't just heard, it was felt, shaping the sound of faith, pride, and Black American hope. From the humble church pews of Alabama to the blinding lights of the world's biggest stages, he rose from struggle to glory, turning hardship into harmony and sorrow into song. Eddie Levert is more than a legend. He is the pulse of survival itself, a living monument to grace, grit, and the price of greatness. Yet behind the legend, the storm never truly passed. The man who lifted millions with his voice has buried 3 of his own children. And now, at 83, the titan who once moved the world with joy stands in a haunting silence, facing shadows only his soul can name. When the lights fade and the music stops, can the man who taught the world to love still find peace within his own heart? Before we begin, press like and leave a heart in the comments. A simple act of love for the last great soul warrior still singing through the storm. What a cruel thing it is that some voices must first cry before they can sing. Some souls are forged in silence and shaped by hunger. Every legend begins with a wound, and Eddie Levert's story was born from the red clay and weary prayers of Alabama. A boy who grew up unseen, yet destined to be heard. He came into this world on June 16, 1942, in Bessemer, Alabama, a town where steel dust clung to the air and dreams rusted before they could shine. His father worked brutal shifts at the local mills. His mother scrubbed floors and washed strangers' clothes until her hands cracked. Faith was their only currency. The Levert home was a small wooden house that leaked in the rain and groaned in the wind. Some nights, the kitchen echoed louder than it should have because there was no food. His mother would hand him the larger half of a single slice of bread and whisper, "Eat, baby. I'm not hungry." He knew she was lying, and that broke him more than the hunger itself. He did not just grow up poor. He grew up invisible, one of millions of black children born into a promise that never arrived. School offered no kindness. Some classmates laughed at his worn shoes. Others said, "You'll never make it out of here." They were wrong. In the small Baptist church near his home, his mother would whisper, "Sing it like you mean it, Eddie." And he did. In that room of wood and hope, his voice rose like sunlight through storm clouds. Every note was a prayer, and every prayer was survival. Years later, he would recall, "I did not know it then, but singing in that church was saving me from the silence of poverty." When Eddie was 6, his parents made the most desperate decision of their lives. They packed what little they owned into a truck that rattled more than it ran and headed north to Canton, Ohio, chasing rumors of work and mercy. It was the Great Migration, millions like them leaving the Jim Crow South for a chance at dignity. The road was long, cold, and uncertain. They slept at gas stations, shared food with strangers, and prayed the truck would make it 1 more mile. It was heartbreaking, and yet it was home. Canton was not the promised land they'd imagined. The winters there were merciless. The boy who once ran barefoot on Alabama dirt now trudged through icy streets in torn shoes that let in the cold. His father's back bent further under factory labor. His mother's hands bled from cleaning other people's homes. Still, every Sunday, the family lit candles and sang. "The darker it gets," his father told him, "the brighter we must sound." That little house became a chapel made of hope. Eddie sang to stay alive. He sang to keep warm. He sang because silence hurt more than hunger. When you've got no heat, he would later say. You learn to make fire from your own breath. The choir became his refuge, a small corner of heaven carved inside hardship. His voice carried the weight of his people, his pain, and his prayers. By 15, music was no longer a dream. It was his lifeline, his rebellion, his reason. Poverty had tried to bend him, but music straightened him again. Out of hunger came rhythm. Out of cold came soul. Out of pain came purpose. He was one of those rare souls who refused to let despair define him. Every rejection, every night of emptiness became fuel. He had no money, no safety, and no certainty. Only that voice. But that was enough. From a boy who once sang for supper, he would one day earn more than $20 million from that same voice. The voice that rose above poverty, prejudice, and pain. Faith, he learned, is not what you say on Sunday. It is what you sing when you are hungry. Greatness, he proved, does not come from what you have, but from what you survive. And from that voice, born of faith, fire, and survival, came a legacy that would lift the world for generations. He was not supposed to rise, but he did. The hunger never left. It just changed its name. What once gnawed at Eddie's stomach now burned inside his chest. The boy who sang through hunger had become a young man chasing the sound of freedom. The church walls could no longer contain that voice. It wanted streets, lights, faces, anyone who might believe in him. But dreams, like rent, always came due, and faith, though beautiful, could not buy gasoline. In the late 1950s, Canton, Ohio, was still a town wrapped in coal dust and cold wind. The steel mills screamed at dawn, and hope was a luxury most people couldn't afford. Eddie worked any job he could find, sweeping factory floors, loading boxes, cleaning tools for men twice his age. At night, he sang with his school friends, calling themselves the Triumphs, later the Mascots. They practiced in garages that smelled of oil and rust, harmonizing under a single bulb that flickered like a dying heartbeat. Their microphones were broomsticks, their music, their only currency. Some nights, there wasn't enough money for dinner, only for gas. The boys would drive to cheap gigs in a rust-red Chevy that coughed up smoke and prayers. They sang for crowds that barely looked at them, for pay that barely bought bread. When the show was over, they curled up in that same car, jackets for blankets, the night air slicing through the cracks in the doors. Eddie would wake to the sound of the wind moaning through the fields, his stomach burning with hunger. He'd scrape frost from the windshield with numb fingers, whispering a prayer that the engine and the dream would start again. We didn't have hotels, he would later recall with a weary smile. We had headlights. Inside that car, they laughed to keep from crying, writing songs on napkins and gas receipts. There were nights when silence filled the radio, broken only by the rumble of passing trucks and the echo of their own voices. We sang, Eddie once said, to keep warm. When they finally recorded a demo and sent it to every label they could find, most letters never came back. Some were returned unopened. Others came with a note sharp as a knife. Too rough, too southern, too black. Eddie folded those words and kept them in his pocket. Not as shame, but as fuel. If they won't open their doors, he told Walter, we'll build our own stage. In 1961, a crack of light appeared. King Records in Cincinnati offered a small deal, just enough to dream a little louder. They wore their best second-hand suits, drove all night, and sang as if their lives depended on it. And maybe they did. They recorded Lonely Drifter, a song about a man wandering the world, unseen and unheard. It was their truth wrapped in melody. But when the record was released, no one played it. The world stayed silent. We waited by the radio, Eddie recalled. It never came. That silence broke them. Bobby left first, then Bill. We'll be back when times get better, they said. Times never did. Eddie watched their silhouettes fade down the road, their laughter swallowed by the wind. For the first time, the car felt too big, and the dream too small. But Eddie stayed. Walter Williams stayed. William Powell stayed. They had nothing but faith and the broken rhythm of survival. If all we have is each other, Eddie said, then we've got a band. By the mid-1960s, they renamed themselves the OJs, in honor of a Cleveland DJ who once believed in them. But belief didn't buy groceries. They hustled from one bar to another, singing through cigarette smoke and clinking bottles, their voices raw but honest. Some nights, they sang for 3 people. Other nights, just for the bartender. Still, Eddie sang like the world was listening. Every rejection became a lyric, he said. Every mile became a verse. Then came Philadelphia, a gamble, a city of soul and second chances. One night, the lights dimmed, and Eddie closed his eyes. He thought of his mother's cracked hands, his father's bent back, the frost on those Ohio windows. When he opened his mouth, it wasn't just music, it was everything he had survived. For a heartbeat, the room was still. Then applause, not polite, but thunderous, rising like a storm breaking open the years of silence. Tears stung his eyes. It wasn't fame yet, but it was something holy. The first time hope sounded louder than hunger. He sang not for fame, but for survival, to prove that poverty could not silence purpose. And though the world had turned its back, his voice refused to bow. He had nothing left to prove, only something left to protect. The belief that no voice, no matter how poor, should ever go unheard. And so, the boy who once sang for supper became the man who taught the world that pain, when sung with honesty, can sound a lot like hope. The storm had passed, or so he thought. But sometimes, what looks like calm is only the breath before destiny explodes. By the early 1970s, Eddie Levert was 30 years old, standing on the edge of everything he'd ever prayed for. The boy who once sang through hunger and rejection was about to become the voice of a generation. In 1972, when the OJs signed with Philadelphia International Records, the world finally heard what struggle had been teaching him all along. Backstabbers hit like lightning. Love Train turned into a worldwide anthem, and For the Love of Money echoed through the streets as both warning and testimony. Within 3 short years, the group sold over 10 million records. From sleeping in his car to commanding $100,000 a night, Eddie had climbed from empty pockets to global spotlight. "We never dreamed of fame," he once said quietly. "We just wanted to eat, and somehow the world started listening." But behind the applause, there was exhaustion that no one saw. Between 1973 and 1980, the OJs performed more than 200 shows a year, crossing cities until time itself blurred into sound. Buses became bedrooms, hotels became hospitals. Eddie's voice, once thunder, began to crack like glass from overuse. "If I stopped singing," he told a reporter, "I'd stop breathing." Some nights he collapsed backstage, too dizzy to stand, too proud to stop. He would rest for minutes, then walk back under the lights, smiling as if pain was part of the show. "People came to hear joy," he recalled, "not to see how tired we were." Fame had its own gravity, beautiful but crushing. Every ovation was followed by silence so deep it hurt. "The crowds roared," he said, "but when the curtain fell, The quiet hit harder than any applause. Even at their peak, the numbers didn't always add up. Their gold records lined the walls, but their bank accounts told a harsher truth. Unpaid royalties and exploitative contracts cost the group more than $400,000 between 1974 and 1976. They sang to arenas of 20,000 fans and still went home broke. "We sang to the world," Eddie said, "but we didn't know who owned our voices." But pain came in more than numbers. In 1977, they lost William Powell, a brother in sound and soul. The harmony that had carried them for so long suddenly sounded different, lonelier. Eddie never spoke much about it. Instead, he sang harder, as if trying to keep his friend alive inside every note. Yet he kept going, writing, producing, fighting to reclaim control over their music. In 1978, burned out and disillusioned, Eddie nearly quit. "I was tired," he later admitted. "Tired of the lights, tired of pretending I wasn't breaking inside." But when he thought about the years of hunger, the friends who had left, the people who still believed, he couldn't walk away. "If we gave up now," he told Walter Williams, "then what did all that pain mean?" And so he stayed. By 1987, at 45, Eddie roared back with "Let Me Touch You," the album that soared to #1 on Billboard's R&B chart. For a moment, the world danced again, unaware that he was singing through painkillers and adrenaline. Between the late 1980s and the early 2000s, the OJs earned over 10 gold albums, toured sold-out arenas across continents, and built a fortune that would one day exceed $20 million. "We had nothing," Eddie said. "We built everything from faith." Yet even with all the success, he knew the price of glory had never gone down. "People think success makes you free," he told an interviewer years later. "Sometimes it just makes your cage bigger." The applause grew louder, but so did the fatigue. The lights still burned hot, but somewhere behind that golden smile, fate was already waiting for its turn. When the OJs were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2005, Eddie was 63 years old. He stood beneath the spotlights that once felt unreachable, holding a microphone that had both fed and scarred him. The audience cheered, but his eyes glistened with something deeper than pride. "I thought of my parents, of every night I went hungry," he said afterward. "It was never about the money. It was about surviving long enough to be heard." The spotlight burned brighter than ever, and beneath it, Eddie smiled. The kind of smile only survivors wear. For a while, it seemed he had outrun every storm. But some storms don't fall from the sky. They rise from within. The crowd heard his songs, only he knew what they cost. And from that moment on, every note he sang carried both triumph and a quiet prayer that the music would outlive the pain. He had sung for millions, but the silence waiting at home was the loudest song he'd ever known. The stage lights still burned in his eyes as he stepped into the darkness of his house, a house that once overflowed with laughter, now echoing with the quiet weight of distance. She was the woman who walked beside him when he had nothing, and the one he couldn't hold on to when he finally had it all. Martha Bird Levert wasn't just his wife. She was the witness to every bruise, every prayer, every note that built the man the world would later cheer for. They met in the early 1960s, when Eddie was a dreamer in a second-hand suit, singing in smoky clubs around Canton, Ohio. Martha saw him not for what he was, but for what he could become. They married in 1966, two hearts chasing one rhythm, with pockets empty but souls full. Their first home was small and drafty, its wallpaper peeling and the heater groaning through Ohio winters, but laughter made it warm. Every morning she hummed hymns while he practiced scales. Every night he whispered songs to the baby growing inside her. When Gerald was born later that year, Eddie wept, promising that his voice would build a better world for his son. 2 years later came Sean, wild and bright, a child who danced before he walked. "Those were the happiest years," Eddie once said. "We didn't have money, but we had music, and that was enough." But success is a cruel trade. It takes what it wants in exchange for everything you thought you could keep. By 1972, the OJs had become a phenomenon. Tours, interviews, flights. His calendar was full, but his house was empty. "The road that gave me everything also took me from them," Eddie would admit later. Martha stayed home with 2 growing boys, holding the fort as fame took her husband further from reach. The phone calls grew shorter, the visits rarer. He'd come home at 3 a.m., still smelling of stage smoke and applause, and find Martha asleep on the couch, the TV still glowing, the boys' toys scattered on the floor. Fame was feeding him, but starving them. "We stopped fighting," he said, "not because we stopped caring, but because silence became our new language." Their last night together wasn't filled with shouting, just the sound of rain tapping against the window and 2 people realizing they'd become strangers. When he left, he took only a suitcase and his guitar. The rest, the laughter, the family, the warmth, stayed behind. They had been married for nearly 2 decades, long enough to build dreams and break under their weight. The divorce papers came quietly, without lawyers or spectacle. The papers said, "Divorce," Eddie later said. "But what I lost wasn't a marriage. It was my family." The house, the records, the memories stayed with her. He kept the songs. The children lived mostly with Martha, while Eddie buried himself in the only place that still made sense, the studio. "I thought I could fix it with money," he admitted years later, "but all they really wanted was time." He often spoke of Martha with a quiet tenderness that never left his eyes. "She saw me before the world did," he said. "She believed I could fly before I had wings." He said the same of his sons, especially Gerald, who began to sing before he could read. Eddie would lift him on his shoulders and whisper, "One day, you'll sing louder than me." He didn't know then how true that would become. The day he moved out, Gerald ran after the car, waving a toy microphone. Eddie watched in the rearview mirror until his son disappeared, a vision that haunted him for decades. "Every song I ever wrote," he said, "was me trying to make it back to that moment, to hold on a little longer." He thought losing love was the worst pain a man could feel, but life was far from done testing his heart. In the years to come, the silence that began in his marriage would echo through his very soul. Yet even as the world kept demanding his voice, somewhere far away, in a small Ohio window, a single light kept burning, a quiet reminder of the home, the woman, and the love he never stopped missing. He was 63 when love dared to knock again. 20 years after his first marriage had quietly ended in the wreckage of fame and silence. By 2005, Eddie Levert had already lived a lifetime's worth of triumph and tragedy. He had known the roar of sold-out arenas and the unbearable quiet of an empty home. He had buried friends, watched sons grow into men, and carried the guilt of a husband who had learned too late what love really costs. He wasn't looking for redemption, only rest. But then came Raquel Capton, a woman whose calm presence would turn rest into healing, and healing into a second chance at love. They met when the world had stopped expecting Eddie to fall in love again. Raquel didn't come to fix him. She came to remind him that broken things can still hold light. She was soft-spoken, deeply spiritual, and patient, the kind of patience forged from her own scars. She was very intelligent, very human, very close to God, Eddie would later say. She gave me peace in a way I'd never known. For the first time in decades, he began to laugh again. Not the stage laugh that filled stadiums, but the quiet kind that comes when you feel safe. When they married that year, it wasn't a celebrity affair. It was two souls exchanging promises not to be perfect, but to stay. Their love grew not from fireworks, but from small, ordinary mornings. Eddie would wake early, humming OJ's melodies as coffee brewed. Raquel would tease him about still rehearsing after 60 years in the business. Habit, he'd grin. Old habits that remind me I'm still alive. Their daughter, Ryan, born in 2002 before their marriage, was the golden thread stitching this new chapter together. Eddie was older now, more tender, more patient, more aware of time slipping through his fingers. He'd braid her hair while Raquel packed lunches, or sit by her bed telling stories about when her brothers were little. The house, once haunted by echoes, now pulsed with laughter and gospel music again. This time, Eddie once said, I didn't want to just be a singer. I wanted to be there when the song ended. But even love that heals can ache. Touring still called his name. The stage was both his blessing and his curse. There were nights Raquel waited by the phone, praying his heart, already weary from years of pain, would hold up under the lights. There were arguments born not from anger, but from fear. She didn't marry the legend, he later admitted. She married the man who was still learning how to stay. Yet through it all, Raquel never walked away. When he grew silent, she prayed beside him. When he doubted himself, she reminded him, love isn't a song you perform once. It's one you practice every day. As the years passed, their bond deepened into something quieter, wiser, almost sacred. They built a life between Las Vegas and Ohio, a balance of glamour and simplicity. Eddie, once restless, now found joy in stillness, cooking dinner, feeding the dog, tending the backyard garden under the desert sun. He often said that his real standing ovation came every night when Raquel smiled at him across the dinner table. I used to think love was what the world gave you, he told a friend. But Raquel taught me it's what you give back. Everywhere he went, people still asked about his hits. Love Train, For the Love of Money, Backstabbers. But the real music, he said, played at home now, in the quiet rhythm of his family's laughter. I had to lose everything, Eddie reflected, to learn how to love right. In Raquel's eyes, he found not the spotlight's glare, but a gentler glow, the kind that doesn't fade when the curtains fall. And in Ryan's laughter, he heard the sweetest encore of all, proof that love, when given a second chance, can still sound like grace. There are pains the human heart was never meant to feel, wounds so deep they echo for a lifetime. The worst of them all is a parent burying their child. For Eddie Levert, that moment came on November 10, 2006, when the brightest voice of his world went silent. Gerald Levert wasn't just Eddie's eldest son. He was his reflection, his echo, his rhythm, his pride. Born on July 13, 1966, to Eddie and Martha Bird Levert, Gerald had music in his blood before he could even speak. He was the little boy who fell asleep backstage, curled up in the glow of stage lights, while his father's voice filled the empty halls. He used to sit behind the curtain, Eddie once said, mouthing every word I sang, like he already knew them before I did. That boy grew into a man who didn't just inherit his father's gift. He magnified it. By the 1980s, Gerald had become a storm of his own. His smile could fill a room. His voice, pure velvet and thunder, could move strangers to tears. He was the living proof that soul runs in the blood. But to Eddie, he was still just my boy. The kid who called every morning. The one who'd say, "Hey, Pops, you still working those old school moves?" They teased each other, argued, prayed together, and always laughed before walking on stage. Their duet, "Baby Hold On to Me," wasn't just a song. It was their heartbeat recorded in time, a father's pride meeting a son's promise. During that session, the producer remembered seeing Eddie turn away, eyes wet, as Gerald sang, "Whatever you do, don't let go." That wasn't a lyric, Eddie said later. That was him talking to me. But the higher the climb, the thinner the air. Fame demanded more than any human could give. Endless tours, sleepless nights, interviews, airports, a carousel of exhaustion. Eddie saw it in his son's eyes, but told himself it was just fatigue. "He had my fire," Eddie said, "but I forgot he didn't have my years." Then came that cold Friday morning in Las Vegas. Eddie woke early, the desert light crawling through his curtains. The phone rang, Gerald's name flashing on the screen. He smiled. "Morning, son," he answered. But it wasn't his son's voice. It was shaking. "Eddie, he's gone." 2 words that ended an entire universe. He dropped the phone. It hit the floor and shattered something inside him. He swore even the clocks stopped ticking. Across town, Martha Bird collapsed to her knees, clutching their son's photo. 2 parents, once bound by love, now bound again by grief. The world found out hours later. Radio hosts broke down mid-sentence. Fans pulled over their cars. Singers who'd once shared the stage with Gerald posted only one word. Why? The air itself seemed heavier that day. Gerald was only 40 years old. The coroner called it a lethal combination of prescription and over-the-counter medication. But for Eddie, labels meant nothing. "You spend your whole life protecting your children," he said, "and one day, the world takes them anyway." The funeral came too soon, too surreal to be real. The church overflowed, a sea of black suits and broken hearts. On the casket lay a gold microphone and a photo of father and son, frozen mid-laughter. A gospel choir began to hum, "Baby Hold On to Me." No one sang lead. The crowd just wept the melody. Eddie stood at the front, trembling, his hands gripping the pew so tightly his knuckles turned white. He tried to sing, but no sound came. The man whose voice once lifted millions now had none left for himself. They say there's no word for a parent who loses a child, because no language could ever hold that kind of pain. When the service ended, sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, painting Gerald's name in gold across the church floor. For a brief, fleeting moment, Eddie looked up and whispered, "You did it, son. You made heaven sing." In the weeks that followed, life lost its shape. Eddie drifted through rooms that felt too quiet. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. The radio still played Gerald's songs, and each note carved another wound. "People told me to be proud," he said later. But pride doesn't help when your house is quiet. Some nights, he'd sit alone in the dark, rewinding old tapes just to hear Gerald's laughter between takes. "That laugh," he said, "was my favorite song." Other nights, he'd wake up thinking he heard his son in the next room. "For a second, I'd forget," he whispered. And that was the cruelest part. Months later, he returned to the stage. The crowd rose to their feet before he even sang. He held the microphone for a long time, head bowed, as if waiting for another voice to join his. Then he began, "Baby, hold on to me." His voice cracked on the first line. Halfway through, he stopped. Couldn't go on. The audience finished the song for him, thousands of voices carrying what his heart could not. That night, Eddie finally understood grief. "It's like singing a song you can't finish," he said, "but you keep trying, just to feel close again." Now, even years later, he still talks to his son before every show. He keeps Gerald's photo in his guitar case, his laughter in his memory, his spirit in every breath. "He's still here," Eddie says softly. "Every time I sing, I hear him harmonizing from somewhere higher." And sometimes, when the crowd falls silent and the lights dim to black, Eddie swears he hears that familiar booming laugh echoing backstage. The same laugh that once filled his world. The kind of laugh that makes you believe, deep down, that maybe love doesn't die. It just changes rooms. He had barely begun to breathe again when the air was taken from him once more. 2 years after laying his firstborn to rest, Eddie Levert found himself staring into the same darkness, the same grave-shaped silence. Grief had only just learned to walk beside him when it came running back. On March 30th, 2008, the same phone rang, the same ringtone that had haunted his dreams since Gerald's death. His hand froze above it. For a moment, he prayed it was a wrong number. But it wasn't. The voice trembled on the other end. "Eddie, it's Sean." A pause, a breath, and then the words that stopped his heart all over again. "He's gone." There was no scream this time, no collapse, no one left to catch him if he fell. He just sat there, staring at the floor, feeling the same cold wind that had passed through his house 2 years before. The ache had never healed. It had only learned how to hide. And now, it was back, twice as heavy. "No father should have to bury his child," he whispered. "But two? God, two." Sean Levert, born September 28, 1968, was Eddie's second son with Martha Bird Levert, the quiet one, gentle and playful, always the peacemaker between his brothers. Where Gerald burned with fire, Sean glowed with warmth. He had his father's eyes, his mother's patience, and a smile that made rooms softer. Together with Gerald and childhood friend Mark Gordon, Sean helped form Levert, the family's next great chapter in soul. If Gerald's voice thundered, Sean's voice prayed, tender, honest, the kind of tone that felt like forgiveness. But after Gerald's death, something in Sean dimmed. His laughter came less often. His songs sounded sadder. He called his father often, sometimes just to sit on the phone in silence. "You still there, Pops?" he'd ask quietly. "Yeah, I'm here," Eddie would answer, even when his throat ached. "Just keep singing, son." But Sean's eyes told a different story, one of loneliness that fame couldn't fix. In early 2008, life dealt him another blow. Sean was sentenced to 22 months in jail for unpaid child support. A mistake, not a crime of malice. Eddie planned to visit him the following week to talk about rebuilding, about hope. But the visit never came. Sean fell ill behind bars. Sarcoidosis, a rare lung disease combined with high blood pressure and withdrawal from prescribed anxiety medication. The illness was merciless. The end, sudden. He was 39 years old. Eddie didn't cry. He had no tears left. He just stood up, walked to the living room, and touched the photo of Gerald on the wall. "Make room for your brother," he whispered. Across town, Martha sat alone at her kitchen table, holding a picture of Sean as a boy, the same one she'd tucked into his lunchbox decades earlier. She didn't weep. She just rocked gently in her chair, whispering, My boys, my babies. Until the sun rose, Sean's dreams died with him. He'd been working on a solo album, notebooks of unfinished lyrics scattered across his piano. On one page, he'd written, "I'll see you again." He never got the chance to record it. The melody ended mid-line. The funeral came under gray skies. The air was heavy, the kind that makes even angels hold their breath. Rain tapped against the stained glass windows like a slow, sorrowful drumbeat. The church was smaller this time. Fewer cameras, fewer reporters, but just as many broken hearts. Some faces were the same as 2 years before, still grieving Gerald. Only now, they had no words left. Eddie walked down the aisle step by step, holding the same gold microphone in his trembling hand, the one he had laid on Gerald's casket 2 years earlier. In his other hand, he carried a folded handkerchief, still damp with the salt of old tears. He placed them both on Sean's coffin and whispered, almost to himself, "How many songs can one heart hold?" The microphone clinked softly against the wood, the sound of finality. He didn't sing that day. He didn't speak. He just stood there as the choir began to hum, rain falling in rhythm outside. The melody was "Baby, Hold On to Me," but no one sang lead this time. The song carried itself, raw and wordless, through the room. When the service ended, people filed out quietly, touching Eddie's shoulder, whispering things like, "No parent should ever bury their child," and "You shouldn't have to know this kind of pain." But there are no words big enough for that kind of sympathy. Only the shared silence between parents who understand, those who have loved and lost the same way. Eddie stayed long after everyone left. The candles had burned low, the air thick with wax and rain. He sat in the front pew, staring at the 2 funeral programs folded together in his lap. Gerald and Sean, side by side. 2 sons, 2 songs, 2 silences. He reached out and touched the empty space beside him as if one of them might still be sitting there. "My boys," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You should have buried me, not the other way around." Across town, Martha sat at her kitchen table in the dark. The rain hadn't stopped. She turned their baby photos over and over in her hands, Sean's smile, Gerald's dimples, her lips moving silently in prayer. She wasn't asking for answers anymore, only peace. "God," she whispered, "just make sure they're not alone." In the months that followed, there were questions, investigations, and news headlines. But for Eddie and Martha, it all sounded like distant thunder. Later, the family reached a settlement, a financial compensation for Sean's death. The number was large. The papers called it justice. But Eddie only shook his head. "No check," he said softly, "can buy back the sound of your child's laughter." He gave most of it away, to scholarships and charities for families in need. "If Sean's gone," he said, "then let his name still help someone else breathe." Yet no amount of giving could fill the quiet at home. "They gave us money," Martha said once, "but they can't give me my boy's voice back." The days blurred into one long night. Eddie wandered his house like a ghost, whispering their names into empty rooms. Gerald, Sean. The walls gave no answer, only echoes. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards. Every sound felt like a memory trying to breathe. Some nights, he dreamed they were both in the next room, laughing, singing, arguing over harmonies. For a second, he said later, I'd believe it, and then I'd wake up, and the quiet would be louder than anything. But even in that quiet, something still lived. Love, reshaped by pain. Months later, Eddie stood on stage again for the first time. The crowd rose to their feet as he entered, not cheering, but in reverent silence. The lights dimmed to gold. He held the microphone close to his chest, but didn't start right away. He just closed his eyes and said, "This one's for my boys." Then, slowly, he began to sing, "Baby, Hold On to Me." Halfway through, his voice broke. The audience, strangers who had grown old listening to his songs, finished it for him, thousands of trembling voices carrying the chorus that his sons once sang beside him. Some wept. Others held their hearts. A few whispered prayers for their own children, feeling the weight of every parent's worst nightmare. The one Eddie now lived with twice. That night, he didn't cry. He just smiled faintly through trembling lips. "I used to think grief was the end," he said later, "but it's not. It's proof you still love." Even now, before every show, Eddie whispers both names, Gerald and Sean, like a prayer. He still feels them there, waiting in the wings, ready to sing backup from somewhere higher. Sometimes, he says, when the lights fade and the crowd goes quiet, I swear I can hear them, both of them, laughing again. The world hears one man singing, but every parent who's ever lost a child knows the truth. He's never singing alone. Years had passed since the second funeral. Time had moved on for the world, but not for Eddie Levert. He still carried the echo of two voices that would never sing again. Some nights, he found himself looking through old photos, Gerald smiling wide, Sean standing shyly beside him. And in the middle, Martha. She was always there. The woman who had walked beside him through the hungry years, the long nights, the triumphs and the tragedies. The woman who had buried the same sons he had, and somehow kept breathing afterward. "She was stronger than me," Eddie once said softly. "She lived with the pain, not beside it." By the late 2010s, Martha Bird Levert lived quietly in Cleveland, in the same house where she'd raised her boys. The gold record still gleamed faintly under dust. The kitchen clock still ticked in rhythm with old songs. She kept their rooms nearly untouched. Sean's half-finished lyrics still scattered on the desk, Gerald's framed magazine covers leaning against the wall. Neighbors would see her sitting by the window in the afternoons, the radio humming softly. Sometimes it was the OJs. Sometimes it was her sons. Always she listened. Always she waited. She prayed every morning at sunrise, not for herself, but for peace. "They were my music," she used to say, her voice gentle but unwavering. "And every night I still hear them." But the years had worn her thin. Her body began to fail the same way her heart had long ago, quietly, piece by piece. Friends said she'd become smaller, softer, like a candle burning its last bit of wax. Yet even then, she smiled. "I'm just tired," she would tell them. "But don't worry, I've got 2 angels waiting for me." In January 2020, those angels came. She passed away peacefully in her sleep. No pain, no noise, just stillness, like the final note of a song that had played too long. There were no headlines, no fanfare, only a handful of family and friends who knew that another light in the Levert family had gone out. When Eddie received the call, he didn't speak. He simply closed his eyes and let the quiet fill the room. They had been divorced for decades, but this wasn't about marriage anymore. It was about history. It was about love, and everything they had built and lost together. "We walked through fire," he said later, and even after the fire was out, she was still there, standing in the smoke. Her funeral was small, held in the same church where Gerald and Sean had been baptized as boys. The choir sang softly, the same hymn she used to hum while cooking dinner. As the final notes faded, Eddie walked to the front and placed a single white rose on her coffin. "You're with them now," he whispered. He didn't cry this time. The tears had already been spent long ago. He just stood still, hands folded, eyes closed, as if listening for three familiar voices somewhere above him. Later, he told a friend that her death felt like a door finally closing, not in pain, but in peace. "Maybe now they're all together," he said, "and maybe now the music makes sense again." Sometimes, when he performs, he looks toward the sky and imagines Martha, Gerald, and Sean watching. Three souls, reunited, their laughter echoing where grief can't reach. And when the lights dim and the first note rises, he whispers, "This one's for the family." Because in the end, that's what remains. Not the applause, not the fame, just the music and the love that never stopped singing. He had already buried so much of his heart that there shouldn't have been any left to break. Yet in 2024, fate found the last unbroken piece and crushed it. It came quietly, without warning, and took the only child he had left, his daughter, Ryan. Ryan Levert was born in March 2002, the daughter of Eddie and his second wife, Raquel. She was the miracle he never expected, a spark of laughter in a house long shadowed by loss. Where her brothers had inherited his fire, Ryan carried his gentleness. She was curious, bright, endlessly kind, the kind of young woman who made strangers smile without trying. To Eddie, she was more than a daughter. She was a second chance at joy, the living proof that life could still sing after all its silence. They were inseparable. On tour, she'd call him just to tease, "Dad, you're trending again. You're still cool." At home, she'd sit beside him in the studio, pretending to help mix his tracks while secretly doodling hearts on his lyric sheets. In interviews, Eddie often mentioned her name with pride. "Ryan keeps me young," he'd say. "She reminds me to laugh, to breathe, to live." After losing so much, she became his reason to get up every morning, his hope made flesh. But even the brightest lights sometimes fade too soon. Around her late teens, Ryan began feeling tired, the kind of exhaustion no sleep could cure. Her hands would ache, her skin bruised easily, and her laughter, once constant, began to waver. Doctors ran tests, and then came the words that changed everything. Lupus, a chronic autoimmune disease, one that turns the body against itself. She was barely 20. The hospital room glowed in soft white light. Machines beeped steadily beside her, each sound a fragile rhythm keeping time with her fight. Eddie sat at her bedside, his hands wrapped around hers, whispering prayers into the sterile air. "We'll beat this, baby," he told her. "You're tougher than this." And Ryan, even in pain, would smile and whisper back, "I know, Daddy. Don't cry." She documented her journey online with humor and grace, calling herself a lupus fighter. Her final post read, "Still fighting, still grateful, still laughing." But lupus is a thief that takes without warning. By December 2024, her health began to slip faster than anyone expected. The hospital's Christmas lights shimmered outside her window, gold, red, and green reflections dancing on the glass. Eddie was there that night, holding her hand, the room filled with the soft hum of a gospel song playing from her phone. Her breathing grew shallow. Her hand trembled once, then rested. Eddie kissed her forehead and whispered, "It's okay, baby. You can rest now." The world called it a tragedy. For Eddie, it was the final breaking of a heart already cracked 1,000 times. He buried her beside her brothers, 3 graves now, side by side, like verses of a song too sad to finish. At the funeral, sunlight poured through the stained glass, casting streaks of violet and gold across her white casket. The purple lupus ribbon lay on the lid, shimmering like a crown. Her blanket was embroidered with one word in silver thread: fighter. Raquel wept softly beside him, her shoulders shaking with memories. Eddie stood silent, staring at the light spilling over her name. "She fought harder than anyone ever should have had to," he whispered. Weeks later, while going through her things, Eddie found a folded note tucked inside her notebook. Her handwriting small, careful, steady. "Keep singing, Daddy. I'll be listening." He never showed it to anyone. But before every show, he still opens it, traces the ink with his thumb, and whispers her name. For months after her passing, he didn't return to the stage. His Las Vegas home grew quiet again. Yet this time, the silence felt different. Not empty, but sacred. "She taught me how to live again," he said softly in an interview months later. Even in pain, she smiled. "I owe her that, to keep smiling." He began supporting lupus foundations, funding research and scholarships in her name. "Brian still helps people," he said. "That's who she was." Now, before every show, Eddie stands backstage a little longer. He closes his eyes and whispers 3 names: Gerald, Sean, Ryan, each syllable a prayer. Then he steps into the spotlight. Sometimes, as he looks up, the stage lights split into 3 beams. One gold, one blue, one violet, crossing high above him before blending into white. Eddie always smiles when he sees it. "You're still singing," he whispers. Because when a father has loved and lost this much, death doesn't take away the music. It only teaches him how to sing differently. Loss had become the language of Eddie Levert's life. But not every goodbye came from family. Some came from the brothers who once stood beside him under the spotlight, singing the same dream. Perhaps fans still remember the founding members, the men who helped build the sound of the OJs, and how some of them met their ends in ways so sudden, so tragic, that even decades later, the memories still sting. In the beginning, they were just 5 boys from Canton, Ohio, chasing the echo of a dream. Eddie Levert, Walter Williams, William Powell, Bobby Massey, and Bill Iles. They called themselves the Triumphs, long before the world called them the OJs. They rode in beat-up cars, carrying thrift store suits and borrowed microphones, playing anywhere that would let them plug in. When they sang, the room changed. William Powell's voice cut through the air. Smooth, disciplined, pure. Eddie often said, "William was our compass. He didn't just sing harmony, he gave us direction." They shared one meal when money was low, one laugh when the road was long, and one dream that somehow, someday, they'd be heard. That dream came true, but at a terrible price. By the mid-1970s, the OJs were international stars. Love Train and Backstabbers had made them icons of Philadelphia soul. They toured the world, filled arenas, and their faces lit up every TV screen. Yet behind the smiles, William Powell was fading. He began to feel weak, missing rehearsals, his once booming voice trembling on stage. Doctors gave the news no one wanted to hear: colon cancer. He was only 33. "He didn't tell us right away," Eddie later said. "He just kept saying, 'Let's finish this album first.'" The band carried on as William's strength slipped away. He would sing until the pain forced him to sit, then wave them to keep playing. He didn't want the music to stop, Walter Williams recalled. He said the silence would hurt more than the sickness. In 1977, at just 35, William Powell died. The funeral was small, quiet, full of tears that no one dared wipe away. Eddie remembered walking to the casket, laying his hand on it, whispering, "We started this together, brother. You kept your promise." That night, the band performed without him for the first time, and when Eddie sang Love Train, his voice broke on the first line. The crowd sang the rest, but tragedy has a cruel rhythm. It doesn't end, it echoes. A few years later, another name from the OJ's story would vanish into the shadows. Frankie Little Jr. had joined the group in the early days, a guitarist, songwriter, and quiet dreamer who helped shape their early sound. He was passionate, unpredictable, and fiercely loyal. Then, one day in the early 1980s, he disappeared. No calls, no letters, no trace. "We thought maybe he moved on," Eddie said once, "but something inside me always wondered." For nearly 40 years, no one knew where Frankie went. His name faded into rumor, his story into silence. Then, in 2021, the silence broke. DNA testing confirmed that human remains found behind an old factory in Ohio belonged to Frankie Little Jr. He had been gone for 39 years. The news spread like a ghost, returning to knock on the door of history. Eddie sat quietly when he heard. 39 years, he whispered. He was lost that long. But now, at least, he's home. It wasn't closure. Not really. How do you close a story that never should have ended that way? But for the first time, Frankie's name was spoken again. Not as a mystery, but as a memory. Today, when Eddie stands on stage, he still feels the presence of the brothers who helped him build the dream. Sometimes, under the bright lights, he'll glance to his left, the spot where William once stood, and to the back, where Frankie used to tune his guitar. The crowd only sees a trio, but Eddie sees more. "They're still here," he once said softly. "Every time we sing Love Train, I can hear them, harmonizing from somewhere higher." The OJs were never just a band. They were a brotherhood. Some of those brothers left too soon. Their songs unfinished. Their stories cut short. But through every loss, Eddie kept the rhythm alive. Because that's what brothers do. They keep singing, even when half the harmony is gone. Loss had become the language of Eddie Levert's life. But even after losing family and the brothers who built the OJs beside him, the story wasn't done. Years passed, and the music played on, but the stage kept getting emptier. Every tour photo, every reunion show seemed to carry more ghosts than faces. "We used to be 5, Eddie said softly once. "Now, when I look around, sometimes it feels like I'm singing to shadows." Bill Isles was one of those shadows, one of the boys who started it all in Canton, Ohio. Before there were gold records or Grammys, there was Bill, the quiet one, the organizer, the man who kept the group's spirit alive when gigs didn't pay and cars broke down. He and Eddie shared motel rooms, cheap meals, and the kind of laughter that only comes from believing in something no one else can see. Bill left the group early, long before fame came, but he never stopped cheering for his brothers. When he passed away in 2019 at 78, Eddie sat alone with an old photograph of the original 5. "He may have left the stage," Eddie said, "but he never left the dream." In that moment, the weight of time felt heavier than any grief. The dream had survived, but so few of its dreamers had. Then, in 2022, another goodbye. Bobby Massey, the co-founder, the man who had fought beside Eddie and Walter through every rejection, every small-town show, every heartbreak, was gone. Bobby had left the OJs in 1971, just before their rise to fame, but his fingerprints remained on every note they ever sang. He was the builder who laid the tracks before the train ever moved. Eddie remembered him as a brother before business. "We may have gone our separate ways," he said, "but we were brothers before fame, and brothers after it." Losing Bobby wasn't just losing another friend. It was losing another piece of the beginning. The laughter, the arguments, the promises made in back seats of cars when they were young and broke. All of it now lived only in memory. Now, in his 80s, Eddie often finds himself looking around and realizing how few are left. The group that once filled the world with harmony has been reduced to echoes. Only a handful remain: Walter Williams Sr., his lifelong friend, and the other surviving original member. A man who has stood beside him through 6 decades of music and loss. Sammy Strain, who joined later, still carries the same stage energy, his smile lighting the crowd like it's still 1975. Eric Nolan Grant, the younger voice, keeps the fire alive for a new generation. They perform, they laugh, they pray, but there's always an unspoken ache between the songs. Sometimes, during sound check, Eddie will glance toward the left side of the stage, the spot where Bill once stood. Then to the right, where Bobby used to tap his foot. He swears, in the hum of the speakers and the murmur of the empty hall, he can still hear their voices blending softly with his. "They never really left," he told a reporter. "Every time the crowd sings Love Train, I feel them. Maybe that's what heaven is, singing the same song, just from another place." At night, when the audience is gone and the lights are dim, Eddie often lingers alone on stage. His hand rests on the microphone stand, the same one he's carried through 6 decades, 6 funerals, 6 lives intertwined with music. The hall is quiet except for the low buzz of the amplifiers. Somewhere in that silence, he hears the past. William's laugh, Frankie's guitar, Bill's steady baritone, Bobby's low harmony, all rising, falling, then fading into the night. The OJs were never just a band. They were a family born from rhythm, built on faith, and held together by songs. Most of that family is gone now, their names etched in memory, their voices eternal on vinyl. But the dream, that impossible dream that 5 boys from Canton once carried, still moves through Eddie's veins every time he sings. The love train still runs, slower now, quieter, but it hasn't stopped. And as long as Eddie Levert still stands beneath the spotlight, eyes closed, microphone trembling in his hand, the music lives. Because brotherhood, real brotherhood, doesn't end with the last note. It just changes key. Now, at age 83, Eddie Levert stands as one of the last true kings of soul, a man who has lived long enough to see every joy, every storm, and somehow still sing through the silence that followed. He has buried sons, brothers, and friends, yet each loss carved a deeper truth into his music: that pain is only love that refuses to die. Today, he is not just the surviving voice of the OJs. He is its heartbeat, still steady, still strong. Eddie lives quietly now, dividing his time between Las Vegas, Nevada, and his hometown of Canton, Ohio. His Las Vegas home, a 3,700-square-foot property nestled under the desert sun, is more than a house. It's a sanctuary. 4 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a wide-open kitchen with marble countertops, a piano in the living room where he still rehearses in the morning light. Outside, there's a pool that reflects the city's neon glow, a built-in grill where he hosts small gatherings, and a golf patch where he practices his swing in the evenings. The place isn't filled with luxury for show. It's filled with memories. Photos of his sons, his late wife Martha, and the brothers he's lost line the walls. In one corner sits an old microphone from 1973, polished, still working, still carrying the echo of Love Train. His net worth today stands around $20 million, built not overnight, but over 6 relentless decades. 29 studio albums, 10 gold records, 10 #1 hits, and hundreds of sold-out tours. What makes the number truly powerful is where he began. A child from Bessemer, Alabama, raised in modest conditions, moving to Ohio with nothing but a voice and a dream. From singing in a church choir to owning homes in 2 states, from carpooling to gigs to headlining the world's greatest arenas, Eddie's life is the definition of rising from nothing. He often says, "You don't measure success by what you own. You measure it by what you've survived." Yet, despite the gold records and wealth, the house sometimes feels too big. His wife, Raquel, the woman who brought calm back to his chaos, still lives beside him. His anchor, his reminder that love can rebuild even after it's been shattered. They share morning coffee on the patio, talking about their children, their late daughter Ryan, and the foundation they built in her name to help lupus patients. Eddie has said that the foundation's success keeps Ryan's laughter alive. Over the years, he has donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to causes close to his heart. The American Heart Association, the Lupus Foundation of America, scholarship programs for underprivileged youth through the Levert Foundation. "You give because you've been given time," he says, "and I've been given more time than I ever thought I would." He still performs occasionally, though the tours are shorter, the nights slower, the applause softer. Walter Williams Sr. remains by his side. 2 old lions, brothers who've weathered every storm together. Sammy Strain sometimes joins them, and when he does, the harmony sounds like time itself has taken a breath. They no longer sing for fame or for crowds. They sing because it's what keeps their hearts beating. "Every night I step on stage," Eddie once said, "I sing for the people who aren't here to sing anymore." In quieter moments, the loneliness seeps in, not a tragic kind, but the quiet ache of a man who has outlived nearly everyone he loved. He has mentioned, in rare interviews, that he still feels his children's presence in the house. "Sometimes, I think I hear Gerald laughing from the kitchen," he says. "Other nights, I dream of Ryan calling me Daddy again." These are not hauntings. They are the gifts of memory, soft reminders that love, once planted, doesn't vanish. It just changes rooms. And though the world sometimes wonders if there are other children, other private joys he's kept hidden, Eddie remains graciously private. "Some things you keep to yourself," he smiles, "so you can still have something sacred." What he doesn't hide is his gratitude. Gratitude for the music, for the people who still sing his songs, for the life that, despite everything, still feels like a miracle. Today, his days are simple. Early walks, phone calls with old friends, evenings spent in his studio, touching up tracks for a charity album he plans to release posthumously. He says it will be his final gift. Not a goodbye, but a thank you. "Music gave me everything," he reflects. "It gave me family. It gave me grief. It gave me God." In a world that often forgets its legends, Eddie Levert remains an emblem of endurance, proof that no amount of pain can silence the song written in a soul like his. From the back seats of broken-down cars to the bright lights of Las Vegas, from hunger to harmony, from tears to triumph. His story is one of grace through grit. And so, when he steps on stage now, microphone trembling in his hands, he closes his eyes and whispers the same prayer he's whispered for 60 years. "Let me sing it right, just one more time." The lights rise, the music begins, and the love train rolls on, slower, wiser, but still unstoppable. Before we end this story, take a moment, press like, leave a comment, share a heart as a quiet bow of respect to a man who turned sorrow into song, loss into legacy, and pain into purpose. May you, too, live a life that sings. May your heart stay full, your days peaceful, and your nights kind. And may you and all those you love be healthy, safe, and close through every storm and every season of life. From our channel to your home, may you be healthy, wealthy, and loved all your days.